One of the first things I do when I teach Textualis is to help students understand how to write the script with a monoline tool. Now, this is easier with the majuscules than the minuscules, because the majuscules are entirely sort of separate shapes. They're sort of lines that juxtapose next to each other to generate the letters when we just let them touch each other. The minuscules are different in that because they are quadrilinear, they sit between four lines, an ascender line, a waistline, a baseline, and a descender line. And because of how they're constructed and how they're written together, it's hard to separate them with a monoline tool in something like Textualis Quadrata. Now, it's much easier in something like Fraktur or Batard, but in scripts which are less cursive, like Textualis Quadrata, Textualis Prisciscus, and Rotunda, you'll find that working with monoline tools is a little bit more difficult. Now, when I started to develop my monoline Textualis, it was because I wanted students to learn the direction of the tool and its movement, because you're working at 90 degrees, 45 degrees, and 30 degrees. You have to be able to produce these movements and reproduce these movements consistently. And I felt teaching that with a broad edge nib was actually very, very difficult. And so helping you to understand these movements and the shapes, of course, once you get into larger shapes like circular shapes in the majuscules, helping you to understand these movements with a tool that you're comfortable with, like a pencil, really helps when you move on to the broad edge nib, because instead of grappling with the tool and the ink and the movement and a new script, you're basically only really learning the movement here with a tool you're comfortable with. And then we take you onto a more difficult tool once you really understand the movement. So it's sort of one step at a time. So I'm writing with a Uniball Signo broad, which is the UM153. I tend to use the black because it stands out more. You can really see what you're doing. The reason I opted for these is because of the ink flow. Now, I spent a considerable amount of time testing different gel pens and ballpoint tipped pens to check for things like ink flow, consistency of ink, smoothness of writing. And really, I tried, I guess, maybe 20 different types of pens. And this is the one I settled on. So this is the one I tend to use for all of my monoline templates and handouts because of how it writes, because of its smoothness, and also because of its size, because I put the cap on the back and it gives me something that's a little bit longer to work with, and that helps with balancing the tool. And it also helps to prepare you for coming to use a pen staff. So let's get to the writing. Now, I have a new set of grids which I've developed, which these new grids, they are part of the new PAScribe Textualis Quadrata handout. They come with the grids. They come in 100, 40%, and 25%. And as you're using this, I would suggest using the 40% or the 25% grid, depending on how good your eyesight is, and working directly onto the grids that you've printed off. Now, you can print the grids off at 100% and put them underneath a sheet of paper. And that then helps you to use successive sheets of paper in like a marker pad or a layout pad. But if you have the ability to print, I would suggest you print these off and write directly onto them. So let's get started with the letters. Now, I'm going to do the majuscules first. And these are majuscules that I have kind of cobbled together, but also some of which I've constructed. So most of them are historical. they are all based on historical majuscules. So I grabbed majuscules from various Textualis Quadratas, particularly the Gutenberg Bible Textualis Quadrata majuscules, and I've angularized them because I felt that getting you to write curves with a broad edge nib is actually quite difficult. So I've sharpened the script up. So you're really only doing this, that, or this, and that. So they're very definite movements. And once you come to terms with writing these angles, these angular majuscules, then I start just curving the edges and just rounding those edges off. So it's a matter of going from 1, 2, 3, 4 to 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And I felt that this was a much better way to approach the learning of these shapes. All right, so let's start with the letters. Now, the grid really helps because it is a grid that is ruled up to allow me to have my 45s, to have a counter 45, and to have lots of vertical. So we're doing the majuscules. And you can see it's really sort of separate, the way the letters work. The lines are very, very separate. This C is taken from the Gutenberg Majuscules, the really wonderful angular C. You're not having to cope with curves. This E as well is from the Gutenberg Bible. As is this G. Should be a little bit longer. And as you can see, I've moved from really angular lines and I'm just adding a little curve to them. I'm going to use the square here to really plot this circle. Sorry, I'm doing the angular letters. So this again is an O, but it is also angular. And the Q matches the O. So this is the base form. This then, once you start adding just a little bit of curvature to these lines, the S really sort of expresses itself quite nicely. So that wraps up the majuscules in their monoline form, and you'll notice that they are very, very angular. So in some of the other videos, I will also look at how these angular forms just start to round off those corners, and that then really starts to take it into a more sort of manuscript textualis rather than a written manuscript textualis, rather than something that is more of an incunabula, which is some of the early Gutenberg Bibles. Now from here, once we start rounding off these edges, I will then take you through to the more sort of conventional Textualis Quadrata, which has more circular shapes, so things like the O, E, C, G, Q, W, and the U. You do have some rounded shapes for things like P, but I tend to keep that for Fraktur because it's very important that you not blend the scripts It's great to have your own version of a blended script, but I feel that comes at a detriment to your ability to write Textualis Quadrata, Fraktur, and your own script. And you should really have the ability to do that rather than getting yourself into a muddle every time you write the script. It really should be something that's quite specific.